Okay, so what we have here is the McGill pain scale. So we want to transfer this over. So I go into the software and I find one of the tests that I think it looks like. So I think it looks like this dizziness handicap inventory, because it's got a sort of similar kind of structure to it, where there's a sort of bunch of names here, and then they scale at 1, 0 to 4, 0 to 3. And I can change that kind of stuff there. Okay, so we found the dizziness piece. So I just searched in here. So I'm in test, and I searched in here for dizziness. It comes up with this. So I can highlight this, and then I'm just going to copy that test, which I've already done. Actually, let me just do it here. So I just copy that test there. And then once I've copied the test, then it brings that up, and then I can just go in and edit that test, and I can make the changes that I need to make on that side. So I'm just going to search up McGill, which is what I changed it to here. And so the McGill pain scale, the short form. So what I had done when I opened up the screen was I changed it so that it was in the new intake documents. I made that change. I changed the name, and then I went into the characteristics, and each of these characteristics I renamed the characteristics. So when this characteristic group here, throbbing, and the short name throbbing, when you make that change, it then changes on this part of the screen here. And when you go into the characteristics, then under throbbing, you have a test characteristic here. So the McGill pain rating, so that's a characteristic that I created, and that represents this line here. So where I went in to do the characteristics, so a characteristic is here, and I created them using this new button, and it's here under the McGill again. And in the first one that we were looking at is the McGill rating scale. So I had created that. So it was a form, so we're always using forms. I put in the name, and the short name and description are the things that are going to ultimately get displayed here on the screen. Then the type of characteristic that I made here was a constrained value. In constrained value, I used the radio option. And so then I used the none, mild, moderate, and severe. And that's where it appears here as none, moderate, mild, and severe. So going back, cancel out of here. I go back into the test itself. I look up the test here. I find the test that I wanted to edit. I look at the characteristics, say throbbing, and then here I can look up in the search window, and I can look up, and what I'm looking for here is the rating scale. So I would be dragging the rating scale over from here and placing it into here. So when it appears in this test characteristic, then that's where it's going to make sure that it appears here. So the next line item down is shooting, so we can see that represented here. So shooting is there, so I can define the name, and then the test short name is actually the display. So if I put shooting in here, then shooting will display inside of here. If I put nothing there, so if I leave it blank, and that's what we do for things like the header. So when you see here this header, if I leave it blank, then nothing will come up on this other side here. So in this header, what we're looking at here is the header. So the characteristic is the short form McGill, and it displays this wording down here. So that wording is this wording here. I can go into the default value and I can edit that default so it has a word-like edit feature, so you can make it bold, you can change the color on those pieces there so that that displays here on that side. So we'll just take a look at this characteristic. So the characteristic, this is the name, and then this is the default version of the characteristic. So the characteristic itself here is the header short form. So you can see how I created that over here, and I can look it up here. So the header, and let's go, and so I find the header short form McGill here. I can edit that. So it's a form. So everything we're doing is in a form. So there's what we called it. I always just put header so it's separated from other stuff. It's a short form McGill Payne questionnaire. So that's what's going to display. So the short form Payne questionnaire. So that information is contained here. It's a string as opposed to a data or a number or a text. We are doing a rendered value. So the reason we choose rendered here is so that it doesn't come up with an option to input data. So it's not looking for any input data on that side. And then that units are none and everything else is blank. And then that's what we're doing on that side there. So then we can go back to the test. And we can look at McGill here again. And then got the short form McGill test. And we'll look at the way that it's displaying or the way it's supposed to display. So that's your first part we've already created. Now to create this next part, what I decided to do was put another header here and then put a line here and then another header here and then another description here. And I'll show you what that looks like. So that in the software, I called it the McGill Payne line to represent this, and I haven't figured out how exactly to put this in, but I wanted to put in this wording here, so place a mark below, and so that's place this mark below on here. And so what that looks like on this side is the header for the Payne scale here, and that's the Payne line there. So we created a header using a characteristic feature. And then the default option is here, and then that default option ultimately is going to come up here in the software itself. And you can see that I put in this McGill Payne rating scale, and that was to represent this part of the test, and it just had a 0 to 5 selection. And in the 0 to 5 selection, it was none, moderate. Oh, so that's not, oh, here it is here, the current Payne scale. So none, moderate, discomforting, distressing here. So that's the piece that we're doing on that side. So this is representing the line, which I haven't figured out yet. This is the current Payne scale 1 to 5 piece here on the other side. And then that's this wording here is coming from the default option for the current Payne default. So choose a word that best describes your pain. So that's what this is. So it's called the McGill, the current Payne. There's the piece there, and then there's the scale that we're doing with on this side. And this extra stuff is just extra stuff that's still at the bottom that I need to modify. But that kind of gives you a sense of how to get started anyway with this process.